This is Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom, words on leadership, goal setting, productivity, and a whole lot more. Just consider this a vitamin or supplement today for your mind, your heart, and your soul. Wherever you're listening to podcasts, would you mind subscribing to Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom? Leave a rating and a brief written review. It would be so helpful in allowing others to find this podcast that aren't familiar with it yet. Today's subject is dealing with disruption. Our lives are changing rapidly. Things are changing. A year or so ago, my wife and I were attending a meeting in Charleston, South Carolina, and rather than deciding to rent a car, we thought we'd just take a taxi from the airport to the downtown hotel where we were staying. Charleston, South Carolina is a place near and dear to my heart. On September 11th, 2001, 9/11 as we know it, I was actually in a meeting in Charleston, South Carolina, when someone in the meeting stood up and said, "An airplane has flown into the World Trade Center." We all thought it was a navigational problem, but we immediately left the meeting room, went back to our rooms. I got into the room just in time to see the second airplane hit the second building. And forever, Charleston, South Carolina, which is a lovely, beautiful city. I don't work for the Chamber of Commerce in Charleston, but it's a great city to visit. And I was excited to take my wife back there a year or so. So the lady, taxi driver, picked us up and we got in and we sat in the back, she in the front. And she and her husband own the taxi company there in Charleston, South Carolina. And she told us on the way back, or way to our hotel, of what a difficult time they were having being in the taxi business. That Uber and Lyft were just about to put them out of business. I immediately took my iPhone and turned it over so that she wouldn't see that I have an Uber app on my phone. And she said, my husband and I have put our money in this business. We're going to lose our shirts. The couple of employees that we have will lose their jobs. And she went, and we felt badly for the lady. Here she was, a business person, and the marketplace has changed. And she felt the answer was to regulate. And I'm not saying whether it is or it isn't. But we can all laugh and say, well, that's just change and that's the way it is. But when you're looking in the face of someone who's been deeply impacted by disruption, it's hard to be callous. As a matter of fact, my wife and I prayed for her right there in the taxi in front of the hotel and asked God to bless her and to help her. I felt so sorry for her cause that I went in and we exactly decided that we would indeed schedule our return trip to the airport via her taxi service. My grandfather worked as a laborer in a factory and was a member of the union. I can remember because I've lived mostly in unionized places. I remember when Japanese cars were starting to be imported in great numbers in the U.S., how the factory workers, the auto workers in the United States felt. Now, I'm not saying one's right or wrong. I'm just trying to help us put a face on what disruption actually looks like in real life. And I remember people at the one auto factory putting bumper stickers on their car that showed foreign planes flying over the United States, and instead of dropping bombs, they were dropping imported cars. I also happened to be living in Detroit in the great last economic recession, where I knew men and women who had six-figure jobs just lost their jobs and couldn't even find a minimum wage job. And I understand all of that. And I get why they happen, but I'm today wanting us to see that there are real people and real pain behind disruption. I've worked in the not-for-profit in the church world, and that world is being disrupted. I shared this story with a group of pastors one day, and I told them the auto story, my friend who is the taxi driver, and I said, we all say, well, if Uber is cheaper, I'm going to take it. If the imported car is a better quality and more inexpensive, then I'm going to buy it. And I said, I understand that. But also understand if people say, I have something better to do than to come to your church and you're not updating and you're not doing that, no one's going to feel sorry for you when your life is disrupted. Amazon, Walmart have disrupted lots of mom and pop stores. And again, I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. I'm not even trying to make a value judgment. I'm just saying disruption sounds like a nice subject when it affects other people. It doesn't have an effect on me. But I don't care what you do and where you live and what all you're involved with. Life is disrupting. Things are changing rapidly. And make no mistake about it, it isn't that I might have to deal with disruption someday. Disruption is coming, it's here, and it's going to continue on. So whether it's where you work, where you lead, where you live, how do you handle these disruptions, these disrupting times that we are living in? Well, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to face it. Until you face reality, you are never in a position to deal with it. You just have to face it. You can't ignore it. You can't pretend that it's not happening. It is happening. Disruption is happening. Face it. This is not the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. This is today. Face the reality. Now, that in and of itself doesn't change anything, nor does it make it better, but it begins to put you in a position where you can begin to deal with the eventualities and, might I say, the realities of life as you find it today. You cannot deal with disruption until you're willing to say, let's face it, this is what's happening. The second thing that I would say to you is, when you're in the midst of a disrupting time at work or at home or wherever you are, is you really need to study the subject. What is happening in the culture? What is happening demographically? What is happening in the area of values? What is happening in the area of the things that we are trying to market and sell? Don't just go off and make up your own idea of what you ought to do. That's what's happening far too often. People are responding at the gut level, and they're just deciding, well, that's not working. Let's slap this together. Let's do this. Let's try that. Do some research. Do some studying. Don't just go off and attempt something until you gain some knowledge and understanding of what exactly you are dealing with. I would tell you to find some folks and get in a cohort group, an informal group. Find some people either in your industry or business or whatever you're involved with, church, not-for-profit, the neighborhood. Get together as a cohort group and begin to discuss and plan and devise some strategies of how are you going to handle and how are you going to deal with the disruptions that you're facing. Don't do it in isolation. Isolation rarely, if ever, leads to beautiful results, good results. You need to be with a group because you can be sounding boards for each other. You can try theories off on each other. 2 or 3 or 4 of you together researching and listening and coming up with plans and maybe possibilities of how to deal with the disrupting circumstance you're facing. You will learn from each other. You will help keep each other on track. Get in a group. Find some friends. Don't try to tackle this in isolation by yourself. The next thing I think you ought to do, or one of the things that you would do when you're dealing with disruption, is ask the big question. You see, the railroads were king at one time in the United States of America, and they would have thought they were in the train business. But they really weren't in the train business. They're in the transportation business. You see, before them, the stagecoach said, we're in the stagecoach business. But they weren't in the stagecoach business. They were in the transportation business. And something replaced the horse, and it was the train. And then people took trains everywhere, and then the automobile. Every industry, every endeavor you're involved with needs to step back and ask the big question. what ultimately is our business? What is it that we are ultimately seeking to accomplish? Because we all fall in love with a particular product or particular way of doing things, and this is the only way it can be done. And we begin to sort of take the methods and we just codify them and say, this is the only way this can be done. I've worked a majority of my life in the church, and this is what's happening now. The way that I've always enjoyed church, the way that we've always done things, is not the way that a great majority of people like doing things. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we are really trying to accomplish? So when you feel overwhelmed by the disruption and feel that everything you love and hold dear and cherish is being swept away, you need to ask yourself the big question: what is it that we're trying to do and trying to accomplish here? And that will help you get your equilibrium in the midst of a disruption. When you're facing a disruption, you must continually start and keep learning about the subject at hand. Don't feel because you have 20, 30 years experience that you know everything about your industry and field that there is to know. You need to be a constant learner, continual learning. Learn all the time, study. And when disruption time does not call for just saying, well, I know this has worked for me 10, 15 years ago. What got you here isn't going to get you there. You have to learn, how do I get from where we are? How do I take the people from where we are today to where we need to go? When you're dealing with disruption, always be learning, continual learning, studying, and growing. The last thing that I would say you need to do when you're facing a disruption is take a deep breath and regroup. It may look like the end of the world. When we face rapid change, we sort of feel like, well, this must be the end of the world. This is it. It's all coming to an end. Take a deep breath, step back, face it, study it, get some friends, some fellow friends or co-laborers at work. Make sure you ask yourself the big question: what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish? Continue to learn, and then regroup. Let everybody in your organization know this is not the end of us. We're going to retrain ourselves. We're going to be on the cutting edge of this, and we're going to find a way to do what we have been called to do. And we're going to regroup, and we're going to go the direction that we need to go to do what we need to do. As you're dealing with disruption, remember, there's a plan. Face it, study it, you'll get through it. But above all, do not ignore it and act like it's not happening. You've been listening to Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom, words on leadership, goal setting, productivity, and a whole lot more. I hope today this has been like a vitamin or supplement for your mind and heart. Please subscribe to Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom. It would be so helpful if you'd leave a rating and a brief review. And my final word to you today: if your life is being disrupted, hold steady, regroup, face it, keep learning, and keep moving ahead. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron saying have a great and blessed day.